I'm Susanna Davis. I'm co-lead of the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group, and I'm really pleased to be co-facilitating this session today with the Unaccompanied and Separated Children Task Force. This is a joint effort between our two groups. And I think a really important conversation to have around, do the standards still matter? And specifically looking at how we're adapting to deliver quality and accountability for unaccompanied and separated children. So while we're getting started and lots of colleagues are still joining the room, we wanted to welcome you and to invite you to reflect on this question. What do the child protection minimum standards mean to you right now? Do they still matter in the current context? The humanitarian system is changing, there's funding crises, organizations are changing, responses are changing, there's challenges to the prioritization of child protection as a whole. Do the standards matter? I think it's worth reflecting on. So you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen now to join the Menti. And one of our lovely producers has also shared the link for you in the chat. So you can also click there if you'd like to participate. And we'll just give colleagues a couple of minutes to start answering that as we begin engaging in the topic and reflecting for our session. So maybe I could ask the producers to put up some of the responses as they start to come in. Thank you very much. Here they come. Oh, I love this first response. You're being very kind to me as a co-lead of the CPMS working group. They remain our North Star. What a lovely way to reflect on them. But a counterpoint from another colleague saying that they're more aspirational than necessities. So some divided opinion there. Some saying that a few saying that they're even more important now than they were before, and a few supporting responses for that. And also looking, I saw one saying that they're kind of our starting point for response design. And I can see colleagues noting that contextual changes shouldn't really impact what are our minimum standards. I love this last response that's coming in. We may adapt and we must, but we shouldn't throw away what has been tested and what works. And I think a good push, I can see a couple more responses pushing us to look at how we adapt and perhaps also how we contextualize, given the current context. Lots more responses coming in. If you've just joined us, welcome to this joint session from the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group and the Unaccompanied and Separated Children's Task Force. We're really pleased to have you with us. We're just doing an opening Menti now, and you can see the information on how to join in your screen, and it's just been reshared in the chat as well. So just reflecting on what do the standards mean to you right now and if they still matter in the current context. I think most of the takeaways that we're getting from colleagues is that they do still matter, but we have a bit of a push to adapt and to reflect as well. So I'll let those responses continue to roll in as we get started. And I'll share some reflections from my perspective and from the perspective of the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group at the Alliance. So thank you again for joining us. For those of you who've just joined, my name is Susanna Davis, and I'm speaking today as co-lead of the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group on behalf of Save the Children. It's a real privilege to be with all of you today as we begin this session on the last day of the Alliance annual meeting, and begin really by grounding ourselves in the shared commitments and standards that underpin quality and accountable child protection in humanitarian settings. We meet at a time when the need for principled child protection has never been more urgent. Humanitarian crises are increasing in number, scope, and severity, while resources are shrinking drastically. I'm surrounded on this call by many skilled child protection professionals, so I don't think I have to convince you about the criticality of quality child protection programming. But I think it's in an age where we're battling deprioritization, it's often important to reflect on the fact that children often represent half or more of the population affected by crises, that they're disproportionately affected by violence, and all these statistics that many of you might be familiar with, but which we often find we need to advocate for our sector and for the criticality of protection. That children are up to 41% of all forcibly displaced people, that 1 in 6 globally live in conflict zone, and that in the last 2 years, grave violations against their rights have risen sharply. I think also important to point that more than half of children today are likely to experience a climate-related humanitarian crisis in their lifetime, making our sector and their protection in such crises even more critical. The Child Protection Minimum Standards, our CPMS, were developed for exactly this context. As many of you might know, and your responses reflected on, they really are our resource, our tool. They're interagency, they're field tested. They were developed with the input of over 1,900 professionals from 89 organizations in 85 countries. Some of you on the call may have been amongst those really critical contributors as we developed the most recent edition of the standards. And we know that they represent the evidence and the consensus on what works to protect children across diverse humanitarian crises. I often hear that the CPMS are aspirational, and I think it's really important for us to push back on that concept that the CPMS are the floor, they're not the ceiling. They're the minimum of what we must uphold to deliver protection that is safe, ethical, and effective. And when we don't meet them, and we do sometimes, even prior to this current crisis, we did frequently struggle to meet them in some contexts due to reduced capacity. Now it's due to global funding cuts and increasingly due to deprioritization. We risk delivering child protection responses that are not only ineffective, we know they won't have the level of impact that we want for children, but potentially that can be unsafe, unethical, or even harmful. I think worryingly, in the Alliance's recent surveys on the current funding crisis, practitioners are highlighting the rapid loss of technical capacity and of staff and resources for training and coaching. And importantly, more than 70% of respondents noted that their ability to meet the minimum standards had been compromised. So that means for us that our quality responses are really under threat. And yet the risks that we're trying to prevent and respond to are tragically predictable. And that's why the CPMS are so vital. I wonder if we can pop along to the next slide. That's just and if we can just animate it a little bit forward, there we go. So it's got a few critical and important reminders that the CPMS are how we operationalize children's rights in the practice of humanitarian response. They're guiding essential services, such as reuniting children with their families, facilitating the release of children from armed groups, supporting child survivors of physical violence, and delivering mental health and psychosocial support for children in distress. They also define critical benchmarks for other sectors, for health, nutrition, education, and camp management, because child protection is a critical enabler. When children are safe, they are more likely to thrive in every other area of their lives. And the CPMS aren't just technical, as you can see from that big highlighted bit on the top of the slide. They're rooted in rights. They reflect a fundamental commitment to the rights of all children in all their diversity and to non-discrimination. But today, those principles are also at risk. It's not just a funding crisis. There are also these increases in anti-gender movements, anti-immigration and regressive policies that are undermining inclusion and shrinking the space for children to be seen, heard, and protected, particularly those that are most marginalized, whether because of their gender identity, their migration status, or other characteristics. So as we begin this session, I want to leave you with a call to action. Let's all of us here and together with our colleagues recommit to the CPMS. Let's use them to push back against harmful trends and to advocate for our sector, which I know many of you are already doing in your daily work. And as we move through today's session, we invite you to reflect on where and how the minimum standards are or aren't being used in your work, to explore together how we can continue to adapt, to contextualize, and to advocate for these standards in increasingly challenging environments. And I know we will hear from some colleagues later in it exactly to give examples of exactly how they are doing just that. And we invite you all to commit to ensuring that every child protection intervention is anchored in quality, accountability, and the full rights of every child. The CPMS remain one of our most powerful tools, not just for technical consistency, but for ensuring that every child protection response is rooted in safety, rights, and dignity. And as one colleague said in the Mentimeter, they're our starting point. They're how they give us the guidelines of our minimums and help us to work together with courage and creativity to see how we can meet that and how we can adapt in the challenging times that we're all living. So thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'm really excited for us to go through this session and to explore how the standards are being used to support unaccompanied and separated children. And to help us dive deeper into those issues, I'm now pleased to hand over to my colleague Lori Murray, who's co-lead of the Unaccompanied and Separated Children's Task Force. And she'll guide us through the next portion of our session. Over to you, Lori.
Thanks so much, Susanna, and thanks everyone for joining. We are really grateful to have you here and to have you part of this really important discussion and something that we see potentially at risk of being deprioritized. As Susanna mentioned, my name is Laurie. I co-lead the UASC task force. I'm with Save the Children and I co-lead with IRC. I think it's interesting to note that this is the longest standing task force in the Alliance, and it's existed since the 90s. And I think that this is important because it demonstrates the criticality of this issue and the need to ensure that we keep the spotlight on unaccompanied and separated children in humanitarian contexts. We know already that these children are often the most vulnerable and lacking a supportive family structure to provide protection and care. We can move on to the next slide. So, of course, knowing how important this is, the standards do speak to the needs of UASC, of unaccompanied and separated children. And I think echoing what Susanna said and what we saw in the Mentimeter, these are not golden standards. They are the minimum standards, and they speak to the rights of children, which are enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's critical that boys and girls receive care and protection that's accordance with their rights and best interests. And this means that we're looking at every single individual child's situation. We need to understand and assess what is happening, what are the protective factors, what are the risk factors, and what is their own opinion about their situation. We run the risk that when resources go down, we start to look at children as groups. But when it comes to UASC and alternative care, we have to understand individual and specific needs. UASC require stable alternative care that is with their rights and again, specific to their needs. And we need to ensure that we're listening to what they want and balancing this with what is in their best interest. Standard 19 speaks to something incredibly critical to the long-term development of the child. And this is the need for family-based care over residential care, over institutional care, where children have a sense of identity, belonging, and they know that they are cared for and known. We know overall that the sector is suffering globally, and we acknowledge what we've already heard during the annual meeting already about the impact of funding cuts across the globe and impacting the most vulnerable children. And so, with our presentation today, we wanted to take this opportunity to spotlight one region that is seeing increased numbers of migrants, deportations, and violence facing children. Recent research and surveys speak to a dire situation. There are significant numbers of unaccompanied and separated children in countries such as Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and Peru. And on the slide, we've included some key figures that we are seeing across the region. As the UASC task force, we also recently conducted a survey looking at alternative care globally. A few of the key findings from LAC point to a weak formal family-based alternative care system. And respondents in the survey also spoke to the need to strengthen national frameworks, build up family-based foster care capacity, and improve coordination. With that said, it's my great pleasure to hand over to colleagues from Latin America and the Caribbean who are going to help us understand the situation of UASC today. So over to you, Nery and colleagues, who will be very joyfully presenting to us in Spanish.
Thank you so much. Muchas
Muchas
gracias, Lori. Just
Thank you very much, Lori.
Latin American people. Me presento, perdón por mi cámara.
I apologize for my camera. I'm having problems with my show. My name is Nery Roldan.
Yo trabajo para Save the
I
Children,
work for Save the Children, but in this occasion, I am representing the protection group for those that are in Latin America. Our subgroup of protection of children humanitarian action is a platform that allows for many agencies of the UN, international organizations, and other organizations can work in a coordinated and joint manner to be able to promote protection in boys and girls in emergency context. In this occasion, we are going to share one of the modes of work that we currently have, which is uh, care in transit. Is going to depend on the region of Latin America. Many of you may know it as transitory care, care in transit, care in emergencies, which is basically a method, an alternate method that answers to the work that is being done with boys and girls, with minors in mobility situations within shelters or in some cases in spaces out of shelters. And what we seek to achieve with this is to provide alternative care and to provide humanitarian response to situations that minors are facing. There are some differences in alternative care and this method of transitory care or care in transit or care in humanitarian actions, and that is that this model not necessarily responds just to care to minors. It also allows a model to be applied to families or to groups that at some time may require different services, such as legal services, because this is migrant population that is in movement. Comprehensive programs in communities based on the services that that community may provide. The search for family members and relatives for minors unaccompanied and separated. It looks to achieve a reunion amongst psychosocial care, medical care, if required as well, may be provided. It's important to say that this model as such seeks to or is not necessarily linked to protection systems, but what is recommended is that there be plenty of communications as these organizations that are going to do their presentations soon, how the expertise of these organizations is related to protection systems that are provided by the state or at the local level to be able to provide better services. It's important to highlight that in this model, this is a model that could last from 3 months all the way to 72 days. It depends on just how long the service can be provided and how much support can be provided and for the length of that. But we have experienced that the model for this transitory care has had to be implemented in short terms as well, meaning 5 hours to 3 day frame timelines. Since we are time limited at this moment, I would like to introduce now to you my colleague Bladimir, who's going to share an experience in the Darien region of Panama and what they have faced there. And then after that, we will have Giovanna, another colleague of ours. She works for Save the Children, where she will share her experience from the region of Peru. So, Vladimir, the floor is yours. Hello, good morning, everyone, all colleagues, everyone joining us online. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. With you. My name is Bladimir Romero. I'm a specialist in child protection for the UNICEF office in Panama. At this moment, I would like to present the transitory care model, which we have been implementing or supporting to the Panamanian government to implement them for boys, girls, and adolescents that are transiting towards the Darien region, headed northwards. And just a little bit of context, as some of you may know, the Darien jungle is one of the most dangerous transit routes in the entire world. Currently, and during the last 4 years, approximately 1.2 million people of approximately 100 different nationalities have either used or are using the Darien route as a migrant transit route to head to the North continent. Children represent 21% of that population, and we've identified approximately 75 different nationalities. Amongst the most important nationalities are the children from Venezuela, Ecuador, and from Angola, Sudan, and other African countries, including minors from China, Haiti, just to show of identifying UASC cases since 2022, we were able to identify 1,067 cases, 4,500 cases. This is a significant increase of boys, girls, and adolescents that, because of some contexts, have been separated from the primary caregivers or are traveling the jungle with no care support. Approximately 97% of these UASCs are minors that have been separated that due to some reason are crossing the jungle but get separated from the family, maybe because they're walking faster or they're going with another person, or maybe they're minors that are accompanying numerous families, and the main caregivers fall behind and they start moving forward faster. Can we go to the next slide, please? The model of care that we've been implementing is called La Casita Transitoria, or in English, it would be a small transit house. As you can see over here, this is a literal house, and this is so that the minor can feel as if at home with family. This model of care is being implemented by the Panamanian government by their service providers, but with the support of UNICEF in technical elements as well as in operational context. This model of care includes children in transit care, but it also benefits local children, especially of those of the indigenous communities that are in areas near to the migrant transit routes. As was mentioned, approximately 95% of the children that have gone through this small transit home have been reunited with their family. The model of care is not a definite or permanent model care, it's a transitory care model, which means that the maximum amount of the child to be in this model is between 3 to 4 days, depending on the case and depending on the difficulty that may be uh, taking place to rejoin them with their families or their caregivers. In the lower part, you can see how this care model works. This care model is supported or backed with the case management. We have case managers in the field on site that are able to identify during the migrant transit routes, boys, girls, and adolescents, and uh, refer them to the model care authorities. Once we determine the greater good of the child or and the status of the minor, whether he's separated or unaccompanied, then that minor goes into the transitory care model. Previous to that, our case managers do some prep work with the minors. They adhere to the minimum standards and to the entire context of childcare. We've adopted and adapted this model of intervention to the reality. If it's an accompanied minor, we before going to that small transit home, we do a checklist where we explain to that minor where they're going, with whom they're going to go, how much time they're going to be there, and we give an onboarding for that minor to be prepared to go to that site. Once the minor gets to that site and it places a minor in a home type of setting, the minor has a significant ability to adapt and show resilience. It's a very few minors that show difficulties with this model of care. Once the identification is made of that minor and the notice has been given, and in Panama, it is the CENIAF or the agency that is called the National Service for Protection for Boys, Girls, and Adolescents, or it might be the child courts that actually do the request to be able to transfer the child to this small transit home that it has a setting of 8 to 10 uh, children maximum in that home. Sometimes we've had to exceed them, and when we do that, then we use other CENIAF models in other sites. The child is taken to this home, they're welcomed, they're shown the place where they're going to be resting. Rooms are separated, boys, girls, early childhood. And comprehensive assessment is done with psychosocial support, nutritional support, and medical support. And since the case is being handled by the competent authority, then uh, the work begins to try to coordinate the reunion with family members. For example, where are the parents? Where are they? How much time will it take them to get to the site? And the goal is to provide family reunification for boys, girls, and adolescents. This is the transit care model that is being implemented in Panama. Here we can also see uh, a child playing very happily in the outer garden of these homes. If we could go to the next slide. Vladimir, you have 2 minutes to finish your presentation. Yes, go to the next slide. Very well. Here we have some achievements and some challenges that we've had. In order to start my closing approximately 1,000 children have been able to participate in this transitory case in the period time frame of 2021 to 2025. The model has been very positive and has reinforced institutional coordination so that government and protection agencies can adopt this care model, which is a care model that is not expensive. It doesn't represent a very high cost, and it is a transitory model. As some of the challenge, and this was mentioned by the colleague in the beginning, at the start, is limited resources, and the decrease in resources continues to be a challenge to be able to implement this care model. And lately, we are also providing support to the Panamanian government to provide a transitory care model with foster families. And we're doing this in the framework of of an inverse or reverse migrant flow, meaning not going towards the north, but coming from the north back to the southern part of the continent. Here you can see a snapshot of a family reunification, and I close my presentation by honoring all boys, girls, and adolescents who have gone through this care model and who have transited through the Darien jungle. And this is a wonderful photo because this is the moment when a mother reunites with her daughter, and it shows that utmost goal that we want with this care model. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Vladimir. Very, very impactful experience. And for sharing all the work that you're doing in Panama. And now we would like to continue with South America, and now we will meet Peru. Giovanna will do a presentation of another model that they're using in this type of care. Thank you, Giovanna. The floor is yours. Thank you. Greetings from this side of the world to everyone. My name is Giovanna Cavero. I am technical advisor for child protection in Peru for Save the Children. And I'm going to share an experience that was given in the northern area of the country with Venezuelan migrant communities. Next slide, please. First, to give you a bit of the context, Peru is the second country in South America that has a Venezuelan based migrant population, just second to Colombia. Up until last year, there's a data of approximately 1.6 million Venezuelan living in in Peru, out of which 30% are boys, girls, and adolescents. And from these 925,000 people, they require protective measures. In regards to unaccompanied and separated children, the state has registered approximately 5,200 cases between 2018 and 2023 of unaccompanied and separated children. And just in 2024, there was a total of 900 cases approximately. What you're seeing here in this slide is a roadmap of the mechanisms that in which civil society works with the government to provide access to child protection for unaccompanied minors. You can see the first step is early identification. That is step was done. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We were able to do early identification through the CBAF. What is a CBAF? The CBAF are state centers through developed through an international agreement with the Andean community. These are by national centers for services. Here we have healthcare, migration, and custom services. In regards to healthcare, because of the legal framework, migrants are vaccinated and then they go through the entire immigration process. Entry points, could be identified through temporary shelters because many people, because they do not have documents, do not actually go through the CEBAF, and they arrive in the country in an irregular manner. And through these shelters, we were also able to do some identification, also through health posts and some settlement areas, people that have gone beyond the border and that are already settled in certain neighborhoods and certain areas where they would reach through friendly spaces. And through these friendly spaces, many times we were able to identify minors and unaccompanied minors and adolescents. These friendly spaces would allow to be able to identify minors and adolescents. And when this happened, we identified the route towards the rural areas to be able to coordinate with other services as well. We also had some markers such as age, being able to identify the age of the child, seeing all the paperwork, if there was a responsible adult or caregiver, and an application form, an interinstitutional application form was created to be able to determine elements of vulnerability and to be able to provide care for the minors. Yeah, we had varying cases. We had children arriving with parents but with no documentation. We had children being accompanied by uncles or grandparents, or they were accompanied by third parties, or simply they were arriving unaccompanied, just on their own. And if there was if there were documents that could link them to family bonds, then they would go to the next step. But otherwise, they would go to the unit of special protection. What is that unit of special protection? It's a state organization that determines whether the child is unprotected or not and establishes the protective measures. If the minor is not being accompanied, then it is transferred to a residential care center where the work is done to be able to identify the source family in Venezuela or the person or the family that might be in their destination, which might be in Peru, or if they were just crossing Peru to another country. And they would, we would, the coordinated work would be done to be able to reunite these families. If they would be sent back to their home country, which was Venezuela, then they would do an assessment to determine the utmost benefit of the child and ensure that there was non-compliance in failing the or not providing the rights to the child. Here, this was a multi-sector approach where you had state and civil society agencies that were able to develop this tool to identify UASCs to find out what are the risk signs or vulnerability signs and how to provide priority attention to them. They were also given psychological and care and emotional support. State employees were trained, especially in protective services, especially the people that are working in the CABAF, and also people who were working in centers that were uh, providing care and support to migrant and migrant posts. If they required additional care, they would be sent to a mental health care facility in the community. Next slide, please. Very well. In these spaces, we try to maintain confidentiality. There was an interview that was done. We avoided re-victimizing the child or adolescent. We were trying to determine why they were in the country, if they had family members in a city. Maybe it wasn't in the Tumbes community near the border. Maybe they had to continue traveling to get to meet their contact. All of this could be done with case management, which was being done not only for UASC but also to families that required protective measures. As my colleague Bladimir said, these were also based on the CPM. We also use gender markers, intercultural issues, age as well. There were some terms or words that even though amongst ourselves we were speak the same language, there's certain keywords that are predominant in one country over others. There are many Venezuelan migrants that started creating NGOs, and this helped to have closer engagement with people arriving in the country and to provide them legal counseling, coordinate issues of basic needs and healthcare, most importantly, not just with government stakeholders, but also other organizations such as HIAS, UNICEF, UNHCR, Garrett, AGRA, that were also providing services, and all of them were coordinating in an articulated manner to be able to provide this care, especially in legal elements, nutrition, and basic and healthcare. When we spoke about when we started dealing the context of education, that is when the child had already been placed in an area where they were establishing themselves, and then they would coordinate that part. Also, the coordination path, we had to work uh, in Tumbes, which is the main entry point, but many times they would go through Piura, which is another city, Chiclayo, Trujillo, and finally Lima, which is which is where there is the largest migrant center. Some of them would go south, even more south to Arequipe, and we would establish contacts with other organizations. There would be a route that would be uh, provide support to minors, and throughout the route, the minors would be able to get access to a psychological support, kids, healthcare. Giovanna, 1 minute to end your presentation, please. Thank you. Another interesting action was to do a campaign of support and accompanying, not just to raise the awareness of the community to the context of UASC, but also to staff so that they would understand what is the quality of care that needed to be provided. Amongst the lessons learned, it's important to strengthen the staff that works in the state because there's higher turnover rates. We have to continue working on strengthening the first point of engagement. That's very important. And the need for a guide or protocol that was created in 2023 specifically to answer to UASC by, by the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. And we continue this session. Lori?
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your sharing about how you are facing the challenges and innovating to respond. In order to close the session, I'm going to hand over to Susanna.
Thanks very much, Lori, and thanks so much to Giovanna, to Bladimir, and to Nery for exploring in great depth and detail the complexities of meeting quality standards for unaccompanied and separated children and how you're adapting. We do have a few more minutes left to the session, so if panelists are happy to, there are a couple of questions that are coming up in the Q&A function. One that I'm seeing that perhaps I can direct to Bladimir or to Giovanna is a question from Emmanuel in the chat asking about the transitory nature of the care, because I think he's asking that is the child's transit time of 1 to 3 days sufficient, and what happens in cases where the transit time is longer? How are you linking to other systems, perhaps?
Sí, bueno, me
Very
permite
well.
responder para el caso
Allow me to answer for the Panama case in the Darien transitory care model.
1 o 3 días
it's either 1 to 3 days, because that's the time that we are able to calculate that the child, that the family can reach the site to reunite with the child. There have been moments when the time has had to be extended, but it's all extended maximum 4 to 5 days. Protective cases that are identified based on the greater good of an unaccompanied minor, or that the family is not traveling this migrant path, then they go to another protection mode that is provided by the state, which is more comprehensive and requires to activate some coordinated mechanism that is more comprehensive. For example, if the child needs to be reunited by being sent to the source country, uh, or if the child needs to be placed in a transitory care that is more extended, then they will be given placed in the care of the state. But in our case, those children that have to have extended stay or need extended protection represents only about 3 or 4% of all cases. The other 96 or 94% uh, do get reunited with the family. That's why this transitory care model is uh, enough in regards to time frame when the boy or girl is separated. When the boy or girl is unaccompanied, then it goes they go through more extended protective measures, which includes in fact dialogues amongst governments, amongst countries, in order to be able to do family reunification in the source country, but always respecting the greater good of the boy, girl, or adolescent. Thank you. In the Peruvian case, this also most of the cases are temporary cases, which is and what is an advantage is the interinstitutional coordination, the support that is provided from the moment that they leave Venezuela, they arrive to Colombia. There's organizations such as UNICEF and Save the Children that coordinate with Ecuador and with Peru. And then the case, you can see a support tracing mechanism amongst the country. Also, there's an entire network of care that is provided. Legal care, counseling is required. The biggest request is the request for documents, because many times they leave the country without any paperwork. Basic healthcare services, because they arrive malnourished. Some come victims of trafficking, victims of work exploitation. So an entire mechanism of coordinated mechanism is activated. In the case of Bladimir, as he said, in the cases of unaccompanied minors, this is an extended case. There, then the state and gets more involved in being able to provide care in residential care facilities, and they're also done this is done temporarily until they are able to identify the families, and if that is not able to be achieved, then they are given extended care services.
Thank you so much to both Bladimir and Giovanna for taking us through that. I think your answers demonstrate the complexity of this area of work. And also, while we're focusing on unaccompanied and separated children, all of the different layers of services and protection that you're coordinating, and really pushes us towards the need for both quality in each of those layers, which you're obviously doing, and the individual, I think, pointing back to Laurie's opening remarks, that the need for an approach that's individual and adapted to each child. It's a real intensity of work that's really critical. So thank you very much for both taking us through that. We still have a few minutes, so if colleagues would like to share any more questions in the Q&A function, or if you're having trouble finding it in the chat, you're very welcome to. Please take advantage of the amazing panelists that you've got access to at the moment.
Susanna, we have a question in Spanish in the Q&A function, which I'm going to copy paste into English in the chat.
Thank you so much, Laurie. What a lovely co-facilitator, compensating for my very poor high school level Spanish. So we had another question. I think this one is specifically for Giovanna. In saying in other contexts where we use the CPM IMS to support coordination with unaccompanied children, is there any data on how many cases are supported by SAVE and other organizations and how many are open? Giovanna, I think you just need to unmute.
Sí, la data estadística
Yes, the statistical data, official statistical data that is available from the protection unit, which is 2024, it was 900 migrant children cases, especially focusing on Venezuelan children. These they came to the protective unit that these were able to be reunited with their family or are awaiting family reunification. That is the official statistic that we have.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. Quite a high caseload, and the pressure of the work must be quite difficult as well with the number of cases you're turning over so quickly.
Sí, y al igual, por ejemplo,
Yes.
que
And
comentaba
also,
la
and also,
licenciada
as
Roldan,
what
muchas
Bladimir said,
organizaciones
many
humanitarias están
organizations
retirándose
are
la frontera del norte
leaving
de
the border
Perú
areas from the
por temas
northern
de
area
fondos.
of Peru
Entonces, cada vez
because of
más
funding
se
issues. That
llama
is a challenge.
la atención de
And
casos, de atención de niños
there's
pequeños
less
con
opportunities for us to be able
necesidades
to
que
provide
pasan
care
más
for
lejos
children,
y
to provide
ahora estos
support,
proyectos son vistos como
because these large
avances.
organizations are
Durante este tiempo
leaving these
migratorio
entry points. And
se ha
although the
disminuido
migrant flow, being honest, has
de
decreased,
personas
we still
entre
continue to
enero
receive
a
people
la
between
fecha. El año
January
pasado
and
estaban
until last month,
aproximadamente
until May.
500 personas
We have approximately 500
venezolanas
people,
que han ingresado a la
500
isla
Venezuelans that have come into the
migraciones,
country
entre
according
las cuales
to
también tenemos
immigration
que
data,
considerar que hay
and
ciertos
of which we have
niños,
to
¿no?
consider
En este
that
momento
this
no
number
existe
also
todavía esa
includes
separación exacta
minors.
de cuántos
The
niños
CELA haven't
van a
segregated the data to understand just how many unaccompanied minors are within those 500 people that have come in.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. I think very important to point out that these populations on the move are not stopping, even though there's less funding for us, and the criticality of the needs are still very much there. I think we might have time for perhaps one more question if anyone wants to sneak one in. I might take the liberty of asking Lori if she had a question that she wanted to ask any of her panelists.
There is one more in the chat box. I will take it.
Oh, I'm not scrolling down. Thank you so much. Okay, I see one more. Let's see. I think the next for any of you who would like to respond. What has worked well and what has been challenging in respecting the voice of the child and enabling meaningful participation in the processes?
Bueno, en nuestro caso,
Well, in
por
our
ejemplo, lo
case,
mencionaba al principio,
for
¿no?
example, as I mentioned at the
Tenemos ahora
beginning,
una lista de chequeo de
we
preparación
have
para los niños y niñas y
developed
adolescentes
a
para que
checklist
puedan
for
entender un
boys, girls,
poco
and
cuál es el
adolescents
proceso
to be able
actual
to
que
understand
va a
the
enfrentar, los
process
tiempos
that
que
they're
les
going
va
to
a
be
ir,
facing, how
poder
much
incluso saber
time
un
it's going to
número
take.
telefónico
They're
para
also
consultar
given a
para que si
telephone number or a
tiene
focal
alguna
point
dificultad o quiere
in
expresar
case they
algo,
have
pues
any
pueda,
difficulties or they want to
digamos,
say
manifestarlo, ¿no? Sigue
something.
siendo un reto la
They're free
participación
to
del
do it.
niño en
It's still
todo
a
el
challenge to
proceso, en
have
todo el
children
engranaje, y ahí es
participating
donde
throughout the
entramos nosotros
process, throughout the
como
mechanism.
organizaciones
And that's where we as
no quiero decir la
organizations
palabra
uh,
luchar, pero sí hacer abogacía, ¿no?
help to provide
Interferir, hacer
advocacy,
ese
to
canal de
interfere,
comunicación
to
para
provide that
que,
communication
digamos, las
channel
organizaciones de protección
so
puedan
that
entender,
protection
escuchar la voz
services
del niño
organization can
y en el
understand
sector,
and
digamos,
truly hear the
también ahí
voice of the
acudo un
child.
poco
And here I also talk about her sensibility and those lenses that we have in child protection that all of us who work in this field have, where we are able to identify the challenges that the child may be facing. Also, the difficulty of the task at hand, how to identify the family links, how that child feels with that family member, what other risk factors are associated with that. But yes, we are able to do this. It represents quite a difficult challenge, but we also have to understand that we have to take into consideration the age and the degree of understanding that the child may have. And this has to do with the professional expertise of each staff member, of each manager to be able to be that liaison. Joanna, I'll pass it on to you if you want to expand on this. Thank you. Yes, very briefly, a lot of this depends on strengthening the ability of the people who are providing the care for the state organizations and other organizations, because many times they may know of legal issues, but they don't know the importance of providing the voice, the ability of the child to provide to be able to have a voice. Many times they just respond to formal requests. I think that the intersectorial task force was a space where civil society was able to be more aware of this, and with the state, we were able to work in a more coordinated manner. Obviously, the challenge is that there's a high turnover of staff members, and many times people that have been trained leave, and then we have other people taking their place, but the work needs to be ongoing, and they need to be trained pretty much on the go as well in the field. And also, something to highlight is friendly spaces. This is once you are able to base the age, you are able to identify the child, you are able to provide access to health care and to education. And there you involve children more as individuals, as a person that has opinion, that can share the opinions and can provide opinion as well.
Thank you both so much for taking us through that. It's incredibly important, children's ability, especially to participate in decisions like these that have such an impact on their life. And Giovanna, you managed to also loop in an answer to another question that was coming quite seamlessly around accountability. So thank you a double thank you for that. I think we are coming to the end of our time together. I would love to thank all of our remarkable panelists, Lori, Nery, Bladimir, and Giovanna. You've all been incredibly engaging and dedicated in sharing your experience and your expertise. And thank you to all of our participants as well for engaging in this critical discussion around the continued importance and relevance of our minimum standards and how we can operationalize them for unaccompanied and separated children, as well as for all children affected by crises. In this session, I would think if there was any one clear takeaway from the region, it would be the complexity and technical expertise and coordination required to realize quality and accountability in programming for unaccompanied and separated children. And the wealth of experience from all of the different colleagues who are presenting and that they are bringing to the table, and the adaptability and how they're contextualizing standards, how they're meeting changes and challenges, how they're coping with funding cuts. This is something that requires an incredible level of creativity, of technical expertise, and of courage and continued persistence. And I think we can all be quite inspired by what you've shared and how you are operationalizing the promise of the standards and the promise of our sectors in incredibly difficult context. So as we close, I hope you will all take a moment to reflect both on the wonderful presentations and the experience that's been shared with you today, but also on that call to action that I shared with you at the beginning of the session, to look at how we continue to recommit to the CPMS and to make sure the standards matter in our everyday work. If you need any inspiration, you've had some wonderful colleagues provide that to you today. And look at how we can continue to work collectively to use the standards to advocate for quality and rights-based responses for children, and to work collaboratively to ensure that our interventions realize the promise of the standards, and that we continue to see child protection prioritized. Happy to hand over to the producers, and just a huge thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists and co-facilitators.